rope. You supposed it cringe. You are going to lose subscriber.
Thank you for joining me on my criticism ride, and I hope you have fun. Take care. Now, I just need to get back to sleep somehow. Okay, that wasn't exactly a good first video. No script, no planning, and I ended up rushing the ending. Well, at least there's always a second chance at this. So join me as I look to make things right, as we discuss today the do's and don'ts of developing a character. Let's begin. A few months ago, I was introduced to the bios of a user who goes by Hottieman. This originally started with looking at an anthropomorphic Incineroar by the name of Collie. He introduced this character as the Alola champion, flaunting it when I had showed my own Incineroar. After the awkward introduction, I decided to look into her bio and found a number of issues. This is what led me into looking at the rest of Hottieman's characters, allowing me to see similar problems. Many characters had traits that matched each other, or they seemed more like objects than characters. This issue was especially prevalent with characters that were paired in the canon with his Sona. Because of wanting to offer my assistance to Hottieman, I decided to make a document. This document would detail many of the issues with some of the characters while going over ways to fix them. This document also attempted to work with Hottieman's interests and avoided recommending changes that would go against that. In the end, the document was liked by those I had shown, but was also ignored by Hottieman himself. I had even made a video in the hopes of showing Hottieman, but the video was an unpolished mess to begin with. With absolutely no script or flow, the video seemed like an unfocused mess just to explain the problems of a single character. And so, with the document and video down the drain, I decided to combine everything into one. My goal today is to give criticism towards a number of Hottieman's more egregious characters, while giving ways to fix them. I want to see these characters succeed at what they're meant to be, characters. Though, since this video will be crossing a number of lines, I might as well cross the biggest one off first. I will not be hiding or omitting the name of the person in question, as there is no point. Many of the things I say cannot be explained without going deeper into Hottieman himself. As a result, this may feel like unnecessary targeting, which I do not want it to seem like. My goal and focus is to give criticism the whole way through, even if it may come off as harsh. For this reason, I do not condone any sort of bullying or harassment towards Hottieman. This helps no one, especially when trying to show genuine ways to better his decisions. With all out of the way, welcome to the criticism of Hottieman's characters. I can't promise there to be no jokes, but I do promise there will be no goofing off this time. It's time to do this for real. For those coming into this video blind, you might be curious about the document or video I mentioned. For the document, I plan on having a link for it publicly, even though it still needs some work. As for the video, I might have a link for it. No guarantees though. The video was my first ever project outside of a goodbye college video, so it's unfunny, rather terrible, and has a weird theme to it. But if I didn't include it, this video will be as long as that one, which is 17 minutes at most. As someone who focuses a lot on developing characters, I wish to offer a hand at how to better present some of the characters owned by Hottieman. Since my previous attempts have failed, I want to try it one more time and finish what I started. And so, we'll be looking at the rest of Hottieman's characters. From the document I made. If I were to go through all the characters, it would be nearly 131, with more on the way as we speak. 3 of those characters are Hottieman's Sona, 84 are characters he fully owns, 30 are characters he co-owns, and 14 are being sponsored by him. Also, some of the characters that Hottieman owns have been missing bios for years. I will not put this as a fault for Hottieman, as it can be understandable to have trouble keeping track of multiple characters. Though as we'll see later, you'll see why this is a problem slowly growing. One more thing before we move on. The criticism document is still there for you to read, Hottieman, and I promise to offer my assistance when necessary. If you see all of this as hate, If you attempt to ignore and block out everything I have said at this point, I fear it may be already too late. What I say or do will not fix everything, but maybe it'll be a start. With that out of the way, let's begin. Since we'll be taking a look at all the characters from the criticism document, we'll be taking a look at 7 characters today. 8 if you include Kala, as I do want to at least touch on the larger issues very quickly. Now, let's begin with our first character to touch on, Gloria. Gloria is a Garchomp presented as a sex ed teacher in a university. Because of her status as a teacher and the university setting, she gets pretty involved with the lessons. This is obviously themed after the teacher-student dynamic seen in certain types of media. I will give credit in Hottieman's favor for placing it in a university. So many other forms of media try to have it set in a high school, which is a serious no-go. Though all that credit falls short when the larger issues of the class rear its head. For Gloria's classroom, students sign a waiver before entering and are split 50-50 based on gender. The waiver is not just for joining the class, but to partake in the university's adoption service. Now, why would a university have an adoption service placed right in the school? It's because Gloria's classroom has a test where students are encouraged to find a partner and have a child together. When the semester ends, the pair pass the test and the mother gives birth to the child, which they can choose to put up for adoption. This test is to push one of Hottieman's more prominent fetishes, which we'll be seeing more with other characters. However, this also pushes a theme that can be rather tricky to develop at times: normalizing fetishes. Ignoring how weird it is to present a sex ed teacher's class as popular and not having filled with rowdy men, the big issue is the fact students are encouraged to have a child to pass a test, turning the act of being a parent to just a score. Not only does this test put pressure for sex, since if they don't they could fail, but it doesn't take into account the students' lives, especially the female students who would likely have to give up their jobs while preparing for a child. This forcing of sex in pairs can also lead to some pairs not being the right fit for each other due to either parent not seeing eye to eye. Even if some pairs could ignore the child until they give birth at the last minute, carrying a child is still not easy. Hottieman does try to sidestep some of these concerns by mentioning that those that don't have a partner can have their fun with the teacher. But it doesn't exactly excuse a lot of the questionable things to think about. Turning childcare into a test might seem like fantasy to some, but for others it can just seem rather disgusting. I'll briefly mention that I'm a man that follows the phrase, to each their own. As such, I will not be shaming Hottieman for what he likes or is into. However, I still have to go into detail why this is wrong when it comes to the characters themselves, especially as a lot of logic and reason is being broken to properly enjoy it. This problem also relates to the lessons themselves at times. A sex ed class teaching sex and all that is fine since it fits the theme, but some of the lessons involve things like force feeding or giving a live birth, all of which take place live in front of the class. I think if Gloria could use a revamp of sorts, it would be good to remove the gender ratio and that test from her class. While I'm not wanting to advocate for the obvious lots of guys, smoking hot teacher, one class, this one theme can work well if you want an audience for Gloria. Lastly, there are a lot of instances where the teacher dynamic is missed entirely. This is especially the case for some of the more questionable lessons, which could instead be private lessons, likely through a classroom site to hide the fact students are watching. Well, you get the idea. Lily is a character who has very little story to her, so there won't be too much to touch on. The reason for this lack of story is due to her primarily focusing on how Lily reached the site she's at, something that is somewhat similar to Gloria if you think about it. Anyhow, we begin Lily's bio with her flipping through online sites dedicated to large ladies. We see that she's quite envious of them, so much so she has already put on a couple 100 pounds. Yet this isn't enough in her eyes, as she wants to be as big as the Torterra she saw. We then quickly move on to the next day, where Lily is visiting the beach, as it's noted she lives in a tropical city. She's also the proud owner of a psychic Z crystal and a Latias site, or Megastone, which she wears around like jewelry. While she does get some looks from cute guys, she still feels she isn't large enough. This doesn't last too long as she suddenly begins to feel hot, but not the sun type of hot. She was growing in size as her shorts began to rip and her chest pushed against her bra. Many of the guys in there stared at her with blushes and surprised expressions. The once 5'8" Latias was now 13 feet with a lot more weight on her body. She playfully filled with her new body as she was happy to have purchased elastic garments. Elsewhere, far in the distance, the Jirachi giggled to themselves at what they had done. And that's it for Lily's bio, which I should mention is mostly paraphrasing. The real bio, or story rather, is 687 words of an envious Latias getting her wish, which is one reason why Lily doesn't exactly work as a character, at least with this story. We see from the start of the bio, Lily wants to gain weight and be like the Torterra she saw before. Mind you, this Torterra she mentions is 34,000 pounds and is a character we'll be touching on later. Because the Jirachi wishes the one problem that was bothering her away, we don't get to see how she handles it. All we get is the beginning where she wishes to be large like other ladies with little explained reason, a middle where she relaxes peacefully on the beach and gets looks from cute guys that pass by, and an ending where she gets her wish by an out of nowhere Jirachi. A strong method of fixing Lily would be to give her reasons for why she wants to become fat. Envy can work, but it seems unrealistic for Envy to drive a flying Pokemon become permanently grounded. You would need something big, like maybe disliking the idea of flying or wanting to take a break from it. Now I want to quickly address that making a Latias fat is not a bad or terrible idea. Not every creature or species needs to follow the general behavior to a T. In fact, with a bit of work, Lily could work as a subversion of the species. A Latias who dislikes flying and just wants to relax on the beach all day, while odd, can work. Especially for retired legendaries who likely let themselves go or just enjoy food a lot. Not much of an all the popular girls are fat but me. Overall, Lily is just a character that's presented as being fat and only that. There's hardly any other way to look at it without taking a different approach to her character. Yet, as you will see, this theme will come back quite often. Luna, just like Lily before, tries to focus on how she became the size she is in her photo. Even though Luna has two bios, before and after her Mega Evolution, neither of them really help each other out. The before evolution talks about her body through Hottieman's view, while the after evolution is where the problems present themselves. The bio starts with how Luna always loved her species Mega Evolution, namely the fluffy wings and long hair that come with it. Ignoring the fact that the fur aren't exactly wings and thus can't fly, it is understandable to have a strong interest in Mega Evolution. As a surprise gift for Luna's birthday, her mother gifted her an Absolite, a Absol Megastone. If this was all that came of the Megastone's introduction, I would find this at most a minor nitpick. Where it falls flat is when Luna decides to have the Megastone surgically implanted into her body. The reason for the surgery is to achieve permanent Mega Evolution and add more mass onto her figure. The Mega Evolution not only saw her reaching nearly 8 feet in height, but it caused her weight to reach 4,000 pounds. Quote-unquote fans of hers loved this new change in her, and as such her fanbase exploded massively. For those that don't know how Mega Absol is actually supposed to work, the Absol only really gains about 4 pounds. Their height has no change at all either, making this jump in both weight and height rather questionable for Luna. Even more so is how surgically implanting a stone into the body would cause permanent Mega Evolution. Mega Evolution isn't exactly a novelty for some species. It can literally cause pain or more for either the user or those around. In the case of Mega Absol, it emits an aura that has been known to kill faint-hearted people and Pokemon. This isn't really something that you want to be evolved into 24/7, as you could inadvertently kill others. I know that the Pokemon canon is meant to be broken and I should probably shut up, but I hope you can see the reasons why this bothers me. Especially when you remember she only achieved this permanent state by getting surgery to implant a large foreign object into her body. If Luna wishes to show off her Mega Evolution, the safest option would be jewelry. If her mother is wealthy enough to get surgery, she is wealthy enough to get her daughter's custom Megastone gear. something that can be shown off visually, but also work as a way of quickly mega evolving when necessary. Another particular issue with the bio, requiring me to stare at Luna's image for a while, was the omission that she was a stripper. I should remind everyone that her image is rather large, taking up most of the reference. It might be difficult to notice the pole she is attempting to dance with unless you look past her figure. All that the bio mentions is that her fans really enjoyed her new look and that her fan base exploded. A proper fix would be going into detail as to what she does and how she achieved this fan base. Info and details that can help us learn more about her and not so much why she is so large. Luna's bio is rather messy, but because there is little to work with, there is an easier chance to fix everything. I do recommend at most to reconsider the mention of surgery since it is rather questionable. A few I've shown Luna's bio to have wondered what part of her body the Megastone was implanted into though. Phyra follows a particular theme when it comes to Hottieman's characters, one that involves Amazonian ladies. Amazonian ladies that happen to breed asexually and all be fire types. I have little to say about the Amazonian characters as the way the theme of pregnancy is handled isn't as bad as other examples. However, Phyra is one of these Amazonian characters that happens to be an exception. Phyra, a 22-year-old Quilava, is presented as a young mother who has birthed more babies than she can remember. This line is the only reason Phyra made it onto the list. Considering how far the themes of pregnancy can go with these characters, it's not hard to imply wrongful things. If this line is removed, I think Farrah could work better as a young mother. Another recommendation of mine would be presenting Farrah as a more recent mother. Rather than flaunting how many babies she's had, have her be this Quilava wanting to find what it means to be a mother. Her bio tries presenting her as this tomboy that would be terrible mother material, but fails because it mentions she has an advanced degree in nursing and childcare. If she didn't have this degree, if she was struggling to handle her first steps as a mother, she could connect much better with this other character we see in her bio. A character that would be both a mentor and like an older sister to her. Something that could help make Phyra rather relatable despite being different. One of the things I often wish while reading through the bios was a focus on characters' beginnings. My wish was granted with Alexandria, but at a few costs. Alexandria, or Alex as I'll just be calling her, is one of the many rags to riches characters present with Hottieman's cast. This theme generally relates to a character who has always been poor or lived in a very bad environment, but through various circumstances ends up living a life of riches and generally better off than they were before. The reason this theme is used a lot in Hottieman's cast is due to being an easy method to make a character overweight. We start with Alex as a young Shinx living with her family who were already living a rich life, but a thief stole her father's identity and slandered his name in the process, causing the family to become pretty poor. I'll touch on this part later, but oh boy do I have a bit on this. Anyhow, Alex had to be responsible and take care of her sister Ember all on her own at a young age. Because her parents had to work multiple jobs to fund themselves, Alex received no education as a child. Yet, she was mature enough to evolve into a Luxray when she was nearly 15. All of this changed, however, when Alex's grandmother passed away, leaving them all with enough inheritance to allow her parents to move to Kalos, earning them well-paying jobs again and allowing both Alex and Ember to attend school. All of this is so that the bio can present a line that I often worry about rereading. It stated both Alex and Ember started to gain weight. It's because of this newfound source of food they never had before that the two started to gain a lot of weight. They went from thin to pudgy to fat to obese, as the bio puts it. Her parents, being the smart ones, looked into making sure their children were fine. What we get next is the doctors detecting no negative effects from their newfound weight. In fact, they explained the two were healthy being obese rather than thin.
You're an idiot. This needs to stop. Now.
Let me just say that I do not dislike Hottieman enjoying obese females. My main concern stems from breaking logic to achieve such a thing by having doctors say they're healthy or obese, especially when it means an elaborate story of riches to rags to riches to justify the hunger. Now, if Alex and Ember were part of a species that were particularly gluttonous, I would excuse the idea of being overweight being presented as healthy. But this doesn't exactly work for these two, especially when the weight they reach is about 2,400 pounds. There are many ways to go about fixing Alex's bio, but a lot of it stems from the rags to riches story in the beginning. Having a thief target Alex's father in such a way that it ruined his life is quite a strange theme, if you ask me. Alex's father would need to do something so wrongful that he was targeted in such a way. Even then, the solution is merely dropped onto their lap without much effort. They were rather wealthy, lost everything, and became wealthy again to encourage Alex's weight, and to eventually pair her with another character. Anyhow, there is more to talk about on Alex, but the next character happens to share a lot of traits with Alex, such as Alex's special powers around breeding and dating a particular guy. One detail I'll end off on is that Ember, the pyro presented in the photo and story, doesn't have a bio after all these years. I don't expect there to be a bio for Ember at this point as it's been 3 years, but one can hope. If one is made, I am curious to know what exactly she does if she isn't living with Alex. The two are sisters after all, so where is she? Farrah is one of the larger bios similar to Alex and has a lot of problems to look over. She is also the grotto you might have heard me mention in Alex's section. Since many of the things prevalent with Farrah also apply to Alex, might as well get both of them in one go. Let's start with Farrah's parents, Gabriella, a Torterra, and Evelyn, a Snorlax. We begin with the two having met on a cruise where Gabriella enjoyed Evan's fat body. When the cruise ended, the two of them continued to chat over the internet. This would go on for a few years before Evan offered Gabriella a place at his house in Sunny Shore City. She gladly accepted and took along her herbal medicine practice. Though not long after moving in, the two would move to Snow Point City as Gabriella wanted to look for a rare herb for her business. Let me take a moment to say that Evan lives in Sunny Shore City, a place well known for its solar panels, and is the perfect place for a grass type like Gabriella to live in. But because there needs to be a reason for Gabriella to become wealthy, she moves to Snow Point City with Evan following her. Snow Point City, as the name suggests, is constantly covered in snow and freezing temperatures. If you remember Gabriella is a Torterra, a Pokemon that is 4 times weak to ice, it makes this decision rather questionable. We're given no explanation for how she was able to adjust to her new hometown or why she isn't getting sick from the snow. It makes it feel as if we're meant to break common sense and logic to understand this. Anyhow, saving that for later, we soon move on to when Farrah was born and the parents' realization of her gift. Because she has a Snorlax father, Farrah inherited her father's large appetite. Considering both Pokemon are under the same egg group, I could see things being interesting. The main issue, however, is that this gift goes overboard in how it's introduced. Remember that Farrah is still a young Turtwig growing up at this point in the story, yet she is able to eat more than a full-grown adult Snorlax. Before you ask how the family isn't losing money from handling the equivalent of 2 adult Snorlaxes, they're wealthy thanks to her mother's herbal business. Something that sounds awfully familiar to Alex's bio if you think back to it. This obesity Farrah gains at an early age is used as a positive, just like with Alex. Since Snorlax is able to learn thick fat, an ability that reduces fire and ice attacks, she now has it. Though I do wonder how her mother isn't sick since she doesn't have the same gift as Farrah. This is the part where I'll have to mention that Farrah has one other gift. Farrah, her mother, Torterra Hottieman, and similarly Alex are able to alter cells using pheromones. Alex on the other hand uses electricity because she is a massage therapist. These abilities don't make too much sense among their species. Torterra doesn't really have pheromones that could cause something like that, and the voltage of Luxray's electricity is too high to allow altering cells. Why give a Pokemon such a strong ability that could cause major damages? so they can all cause favorable changes in someone's body, like altering their fertility and others or crazier stuff. Using the special gift Farrah had, she graduated easily from college, which leads to Alex and Farrah to live together as roommates. Though it isn't long before a third roommate would show up in the form of Hottieman Sona. I have nothing against how Hottieman treats himself in his character's stories. However, in cases such as Farrah, I feel the way he is presented is rather odd, because it just so happens his introduction causes a love triangle to form. This love triangle seems to lean heavily in Hottieman's favor, one where both the girls are planning for the same guy, but they don't fight over him, even though he leaves them to finish his college degree on a regular basis. If this was all we got from the bio, this would be one of the better bios. Where it falls flat, like many of the previous bios, is attempting to push a fetish onto a character. Not long after Hottieman is introduced, Farrah becomes pregnant. This pregnancy is played up as being rather dangerous and pushing her body to the limits. The reason for why is because she is somehow pregnant with 2100 baby Torterra, which caused her to reach 300,000 pounds.
Jesus Christ.
Since all three of the Pokemon in this relationship have the ability to manipulate cells, they manipulate her body to hold all of those babies, which as mentioned with Gloria are nuts and eggs despite being Pokemon. So imagine a large Torterra with 2100 full-grown baby Torterra inside their breast, belly, and butt. Actually, I'll take back what I said, as it can be horrifying to think about. After giving birth to all those baby Torterra, her body shrunk down to 34,000 pounds. Still a lot, but you do have to remember her Snorlax appetite. Yet, once she becomes obese at an early age, the mention of her Snorlax appetite kind of vanishes. Likely because the idea of having Farrah struggle for funds to fuel her ravenous appetite would be too much. Anyway, I'm stalling at this point. I believe this scene was an attempt to not only push Farrah's weight, but to shoehorn in two of Hottieman's fetishes, those being hyperpregnancy and alternate pregnancy, where other parts of the body are used to carry babies. Once again, to each their own and all that. My main problem with the scene, outside of how fast it went, is hiding who did it. This sudden pregnancy, the babies being full-grown Torterra, and being in a love triangle with another Torterra makes it obvious who did it. Hottieman is responsible for this massive pregnancy and for causing this shift in size and weight for her. Many of the bios involving Hottieman have his name absent or changed with his real name, which is fair considering the bio is about the characters rather than him. But you can't help but feel like something is off in the characters he appears in focus on the character dating him. Kala, Alex, and Farrah are all characters who have the most developed bios and yet date Hottieman in the end. Not saying his Sona can't date others or even multiple Pokemon, but the way this is handled can be disturbing if you look at it on the surface. Especially when he flaunts how many ladies he dates and has had his way with. There's a word perfect for this if I can remember it, but I've spent too much time on this. I think Farrah would need a lot of changes, especially when it comes to her parents. Namely having her parents stay in Sunny Shore City rather than the cold of Snow Point City. If Hottieman attempted to come up with any excuses for why Gabriella could stay in a snow-covered city, it would fall flat. Especially when they were before living in a city well known for its sun and solar panels, which would work perfectly as an environment for both her and Farrah to grow up in. For Farrah herself, there are 3 things I would recommend removing. Her Snorlax appetite at a young age, her ability to manipulate cells, and the pregnancy scene. You can still have her date Hottieman, but the way things are handled feel a bit too much. Throughout this video, I have tried to sidestep suggestions that could directly impact Hottieman's interest. However, I have to make an exception for Farrah due to how far the bio goes into pushing these fetishes, especially when it feels like these fetishes shape the character and break the rules of the universe in their favor. You never want your character to be outright changed or shaped around a fetish, unless you want them to become that fetish in question, which doesn't exactly make them a character. In most cases, it just makes them a visual for it. Oh, hi, cough cough, it's me from the future. This section was originally meant to be me skimming through Cala's section since I had already made a video on her, though I now realize how absolutely terrible my original Cala video was and wanted to make things right. And so, I decided to make an actual Cala section to end this once and for all. Unfortunately, this does increase the runtime longer than it should, but at least we have ourselves some proper closure. Now, let's take this from the top and talk about Cala. Cala is an anthropomorphic Incineroar who is presented as the Alola champion, basically starting as a team partaking in a wrestling league and now being on top as champion. I think champion characters can be rather cool, but due to a lack of development, it turns Cala into a Mary Sue. A Mary Sue, or Gary Sue, is a character who is presented as being perfect to the point of absurdity. A character doesn't need godlike powers or lack of weaknesses to make them Mary Sue, performing actions or feats with no given reason aside from they're just good add to it. The only way to properly explain why Cala is seen as a Mary Sue is to skim through her bio, which fortunately isn't too long as opposed to Alex or Farrah's bios, though it still has a number of glaring problems which we shall cover later on. We start with Cala as a lively Pokemon that enjoyed challenging others in battle. This led to her partaking in a wrestling class around her teen years where she dominated the female league. She was so strong, Cala eventually made it to the male league and dominated it as well. Years later, she joined the Pokken Fighting Association and became the Alola champion. After becoming champion and a night of partying, she wakes up to find herself pregnant, which doesn't last too long as the Solgaleo who had impregnated her gifts her with a tattoo. A tattoo which allows her to swap between her slim and pregnant forms. Now that she isn't hindered by her pregnancy, she continues to enjoy the fame of her status, and eventually dates Hottieman Sona just like with Alex and Farrah. The problem this bio has is that it tells us about Cala's feats rather than showing it. We're told she is strong, but never shown that strength or how she achieved it. This is especially problematic when you consider her taking part in the male wrestling league. I understand that having females participate in male activities is a tomboy cliche in some media. However, it doesn't work in this setting because of the Pokemon that are in said male league. Sock, Throw, Hawlucha, Gallade, and even Machoke and Machamp would likely be walls for her. A Pokemon able to bend iron with a single strike would definitely have some strong competition against these Pokemon. But the concern of challenge doesn't really matter because we're told she mopped the floor with them. Again, this absurdity can make Cala feel like a Mary Sue without proper development. Next is the Pokken Fighting Association, which I won't fuss about the naming. The big problem, like the wrestling league, is that we're told she became champion and that's it. No sign of her struggling or the journey she took to become champion make their appearance. Hottieman has stated that he feels Cala doesn't need a documentary on how he became champion. He is right there, but he does need to explain that's the sort of struggles or hurdles she endured. Otherwise, it not only feels forced, but feels really uninteresting how easily she earns her victories. Lastly is the pregnancy scene, which I would normally excuse since it is one of Hottieman's interests. I try not to get in the way of his interests as I like to present my to each their own philosophy. Though, would you be surprised if I said that Cala finding out she was pregnant was a sign of weakness? I think this was something Hottieman planned as he likely believes a character with weaknesses can't be Mary Sue. Even if that was true, her weaknesses are covered up 3 sentences after they're introduced. If it was a weakness, she would be struggling to handle it and would have to tackle it head on. The attempts to make her less of a Mary Sue backfire in this case, and it makes it rather sad for Cala. Even if this pregnancy scene was removed, there is another Mary Sue aspect to look at. For some odd reason, without any prior mention, she is able to perform a special combo move. Incineroar's signature move is called Darkest Lariat before it became a TM for Pokemon to use. This move has a base power of 85, 10 power points, and 100% accuracy while ignoring defense and evasion buffs. By using the Incineroar's Sea Crystal, the move becomes Malicious Moonsault. This is a once per battle move with 180 base power and deals double damage to minimized opponents. I want you to remember that Malicious Moonsault is an upgraded version of Darkest Lariat, because if we were to immediately imagine those two moves being combined together, it is horrifying. So, let us imagine if we combine both aspects of these two moves and the base power. We would have a 265 base power move that ignores defense and evasion buffs while dealing double damage to minimize opponents. Oh, and it's presented as being something only she can do because of the stamina cost. Even though these problems rear their head in roleplay, the bio mentioning it still brings it to criticism. Kala basically has a move on par with Explosion, which is a move that causes the Pokemon that uses it to faint. And yet all it does for Kala is require a lot of stamina, and for everyone else it will just kill them. If you were to battle Kala, and she realistically used this move, nobody could stand in her way. Even if you were to buff yourself with evasion or defensive skills, the move just ignores it. So she pretty much only became the champion because she abuses a super powerful move only she can use. In order to fix Kala, we would need to either further develop her status of champion or remove it entirely. There are instances where her status of champion makes her quite famous whenever she's in public. Yet there is nothing to help push why she deserves that spot outside of her overpowered combo move. As much as I want to agree with keeping Kala as champion, her actions make it rather hard to agree with it. For this reason, I suggest having Kala not reach the male league in the wrestling class, as well as having Kala continue to struggle for the position of champion to this day. This way, she can probably show her struggle and ambitions to become the LOL champion, allowing us to see just what she is willing to go through to achieve her goal and who she meets while doing so, all the while not being constantly bombarded with fame by those she passes for what little she did. Also, I say removing that combo move of hers is a top priority as well. The attack is not only too strong, as well as having little consequences for using it unlike Explosion, but it adds to the Mary Sue aspect by giving her an ability she is gifted enough to use. In the end, Kala's problems stem from an attempt of trying to make Kala a perfect girl. No amount of saying that her pregnancy was a sign of weakness will change her being a Mary Sue. I dislike saying she is one, but it is the sad truth of the matter. Fortunately, it isn't too late to get her out of the hole she ended up in. With proper character development and showing her strive to battle, we can make Kala an actual character, one people wish to see grow beyond her rise to become champion. For the last major character today, we have Hayley. I have saved Hayley for last, as she is a prime example of when a fetish goes too far in shaping a character. She also takes similar routes to Kala, where the hope to make her less of a Mary Sue backfires. Hayley is presented as the perfect girl who gets a 4.0 grade average and goes to university. This all gets ruined in the span of a single night as she decides to drink alcohol while on vacation, which leads to her in bed with a random wolf who, the following morning, angrily yells at Hayley and leaves. Ignoring the fact how drinking alcohol goes against the perfect girl aspect, because this random wolf leaves her, she starts to feel depressed and suicidal. But she doesn't want to use drugs or alcohol. Instead, she decides to force feed herself till she is sick.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more! Where the f*** are your parents? Who are your parents? I'm gonna call Child Protective Services. It's time to stop!
Alright, I'm going to take a moment and stop here because this is the reason Hayley's bio doesn't work. For one, she has no reason to be drinking alcohol since she is a perfect girl as the bio puts it. Secondly, why would this random wolf yelling and leaving her cause her to enter this depression? And thirdly, why would she suddenly care about these kids that were dropped onto her so suddenly? I think we're all aware of the reason at this point. As you've seen through this video, Hottieman makes up reasons for why a character may become fat or pregnant. However, none of these reasons come close to a character threatening to off themselves. If this pregnancy puts so much of a bother on her, why not seek medical help? Her family is wealthy enough to send her on a total of 3 vacations in the span of this whole bio. It would seem reasonable for the parents to help her out in this situation. And they in fact do, fortunately. But they just send her on vacation. I hardly believe a wealthy family with a perfect girl will let them eat themselves sick, or would go as far as to send her away to take her mind off of things. The entire reason for sending her on vacation is just so that she can be found by a cult which kidnaps her and forces her to become a goddess of fertility. This is meant to be her other character trait aside from her perfect girl aspect. After enjoying her new forced powers, she decides to return home from the vacation, though not before deciding to get payback on the townswoman for something they did to her. I'm gonna say it now, she used her new god powers to make all the women in the town pregnant. We don't exactly know what these women have done or why they deserve this, but I find the scene rather childish. A character who we see as a perfect girl is getting petty and using her fertility powers for minor concerns. Not to mention, it sounds like she targets all the women in the town for what 1 or 2 did to her. Women who had boyfriends or love interests would suspect some sort of cheating at this sudden pregnancy. It would be much harder to work with a baby on arrival and will require women to stop working entirely in some cases, and the amount of sudden preparation for a baby would be insane.
The powers are irrelevant in that case. The fact that she is using her powers for personal gain by damaging somebody else, hurting their means of collecting an income, that's evil. Sure, no one's being physically hurt, but you don't need to.
Oh yeah, and at this point, Hayley forgets everything that happened with the wolf incident. Just like how Callah's mistake is covered up with a tattoo, Hayley's is covered up by her powers. So I guess at this point we can forget how she almost tried to end her life over this. And by the end, she goes on yet another vacation months later before meeting a great white shark on the beach. I'm calling it now. This great white shark is Hottieman's persona since he isn't mentioned by name, just like the other characters. And despite her previous situation with a wolf, her friends encouraged her to date him. There is so much wrong with this bio, and yet there is no way it can be fixed in its current state. Hayley's presented as a perfect girl, yet that gets ruined because of her drinking and becoming suicidal. But her being presented as suicidal gets ruined because she becomes a goddess of fertility and she wipes away all her previous mistakes. The way suicide is used as a theme is also very distasteful, as it isn't only rushed, but is mishandled terribly. I'm supposed to believe Hayley has had so much attachment for this one random guy she barely met that it drove her to this depression, and that her parents only just sent her off on vacation rather than a professional. The only reason I would not blast his bio to oblivion is because Hottieman has acknowledged it needs a revamp. Which, if that's the case, I hope to have a bit of a suggestion towards the new changes, because this just makes her look like an underdeveloped Mary Sue similar to Callah, but on a much different and distasteful scale.
Yes, it's time to stop. No, this is not okay. It's time to stop. It's time to stop. I'm sorry, Bob.
You'll likely notice as we've gone through these characters, a large majority of them seem to share similar traits. This is not an isolated case, as many of the characters we haven't touched on also follow this as well. Whether it be the pregnancy focus, rags to riches, or being Hottieman's girlfriend. Now let me just quickly backtrack and mention something I should have earlier. Building a character around a fetish in itself isn't a bad thing. You can certainly build a character that can best be described as certain species, but fat and pregnant. It'll be difficult to flesh them out most of the time, but it is still possible, as many artists can show. The problem we have here is attempting to flesh out characters that are built around fetishes while also ignoring common sense and logic. This in turn makes a character become a fetish or Mary Sue in cases such as Callah or Hayley. This is especially true for characters that are in service of his Sona. Callah, Alex, Farrah, and technically Hayley all end up dating his Sona. Each of them also have qualities that break reality or are in favor of a kink. This might not seem like an issue if the character is mainly just supposed to have a bio, though as these characters are used for role-playing, they do have a place being mentioned. I think we talked long enough on all of this. If you made it this far with us, there's just the recap and closing thoughts left. Let's briefly go over the changes needed to improve the characters. Gloria. Removing the test aspect of the class would make the class feel less forced in pushing pregnancy. Removing the 50-50 gender ratio would also help in this. Lastly, private lessons and out-class teachings can allow more extreme fetishes to be presented without seeming odd. Lily. Added justifications on gaining weight would help in explaining why she is choosing to do this. After all, there are no attempts made to actually push this. It would help in showing why Lily would enjoy her 5-digit weights. Luna. Removing the aspect of Luna getting surgery would be a helpful change. It's merely used as a reason to lock in her weight being 4 digits long. Also, added details on Luna's job would help in showing why she decided to do stuff like this. Alex. I would remove the line where her obesity is seen as healthy. Also, removing her ability of manipulating cells through electricity. Her electricity is too strong to do this and would just seem rather dangerous, similar to Farrah's ability. Farrah. While I do believe more development should be done towards the parents, staying in Sunny Shore City would be the most important change. Even if we were to say Farrah had thick fat, that wouldn't excuse her all the way or her mother. Lastly, the pregnancy has got to go, as it's only made to just make Farrah bigger. Kala. I've mentioned this before, but Kala's wrestling experience would need a considerable change. Alongside this, I don't think Kala should be champion given how easy she's earned it. Not to mention the status of champion is held rather highly in his view of the Pokemon world. Hayley. Even though Hayley is getting revamped, I do still feel like she has a lot of changes to be made. In the beginning, the wolf character and her suicidal tendencies need to be removed or rewritten. Also, the vacation and payback as well, since they don't really help her too much. Now that we pretty much covered everything, I should probably explain one of the newer problems creeping up on Hottieman. Hottieman has admitted to owning too many characters, which I'm rather glad he's acknowledged. Though instead of taking note of these issues and holding back on new characters, redeveloping old characters, or selling characters he can't use, he continues to go after more. The more characters he gains, the harder it will be to develop older characters in both art and writing. This is especially the case if he's doing this for a species he already owns a character of. He has recently purchased a Rayquaza and Vaporeon without acknowledging the ones he already owns. This will most likely lead to a situation where he has so many new characters, older ones collect dust and will never see the light of day again. Something that I fear myself, since it could mean characters being lost forever, forgotten and never seen again should the images fade away somehow. Thank you so much for joining me on this video, and I hope you have a grand time. Take care.